My name is Elena Whitfield. I'm 34 years old, and for 9 years I've made my living finding the one number in a stack of paperwork that doesn't add up. 2 years after my divorce, I was standing at a charity gala for the Children's Hospital wing in Wichita, holding a glass of sparkling water I hadn't touched, when my former mother-in-law found me near the dessert table. Diane Caldwell had a smile that always looked like it was counting something, and that night what she was counting was me. She walked over in front of a dozen people I used to call friends and said it loud enough for the band to nearly miss a note. My son should have left you years ago. Look at everything he's built since. 9 years of being blamed for a collapse I had nothing to do with, folded into one sentence, delivered with a champagne flute in her hand. I didn't flinch. I set my glass down, looked at her the way I look at a column of numbers that's about to give up a lie, and said 4 words. Show me the numbers. 10 minutes later, a man neither she nor my ex-husband expected walked through the ballroom doors with a folder under his arm. And a name nobody in that room wanted spoken out loud was about to be read into a court record. If you like stories about quiet people who let the truth do the heavy lifting instead of raising their voice, you're in the right place. Drop a comment telling me where you're watching from tonight, and stick around, because the math on this one takes a while to add up, but it adds up completely. Make sure you're subscribed so the next story finds you. Let me take you back those 10 minutes, because the line came right before the man did. It was the first gala the hospital wing had thrown since my divorce, and I almost didn't go. I went anyway, because I decided a long time ago that I wasn't going to let other people's comfort decide where I was allowed to stand in this town. Diane had been working the room all night in a navy dress that cost more than my first car, laughing a little too loudly at things that weren't that funny, the way people do when they're performing for an audience instead of talking to one. She'd had 2 glasses of wine by the time she found me, and I could see it coming the second she turned my direction, chin already lifted, like she'd been saving the line for the right crowd. She got her crowd, and I got my 4 words. What I didn't get, not yet, was any idea that the man walking through those doors 10 minutes later was carrying a folder with my ex-husband's name on it, and that by the end of the month, that folder would change which one of us actually deserved to be standing in that room. Here's what you should know about me before the rest of this makes sense. I grew up outside a town in central Kansas so small the grain elevator was taller than every building in it combined. My mother kept the books for 3 different farm supply stores just to make rent, and my grandfather, before her, had been the only man in the county people trusted to do their taxes by hand, because he never once made a number say something it didn't mean. I used to sit at his kitchen table as a kid and watch him work, and he told me once that a ledger is the most honest thing a person can own, because it doesn't care who you want to be, only what you actually did. I believed that the way some people believe in scripture. I built my entire career on it. I became a forensic accountant because I liked the part of the job nobody else wanted, the part where you sit with numbers that don't match until they finally tell you why. People think that job is about catching liars. It isn't, not really. It's about being patient enough to let the truth take the time it needs. I was good at being patient. I was good at staying calm when a file came back wrong, when a client screamed at me for finding what they didn't want found, when an entire room decided I was the problem before they'd looked at a single page. That calm had built my whole reputation. It also, for 9 years, let people lie about me in plain sight while I waited for the truth to do something I never made it do, which was speak up on its own. I met Derek Caldwell at a fundraiser this summer I turned 25, the kind of event where his family's name was already on a building. The Caldwells had been building houses and strip malls and church additions around Wichita for 2 generations, and Derek had his father's handshake, the kind that made you feel like you'd just been given something. He was funny in meetings, generous with waiters, the type of man half the county would vouch for without thinking twice. I fell for him the way you fall for anyone who makes you feel like the smartest person in a room you used to feel invisible in. We married 3 years later, and for a long stretch, it was good. Or it looked good, which at the time I didn't understand was a different thing entirely. His father's company, Caldwell and Sons Development, was the kind of business that ran on relationships more than paperwork, the kind of business a forensic accountant's spouse should probably have been allowed to look at least once. I offered early on, gently, the way you offer something to someone you don't want to insult. I could help with the books, I said, just to make sure everything was clean before the bank renewals came up. Derek laughed it off the first time. The second time he didn't laugh. He told me, in a tone I'd never heard from him before, that his father's company wasn't a charity case for his wife to come audit, that he'd been running those books since he was 22, and that I should worry about my own clients and let him worry about his. I pushed once. I pushed twice. Then I did the thing a person does when they've decided peace matters more than being right, which is let it go and tell yourself you were never that worried in the first place. The company's biggest project in years was something called Sunridge Crossing, a housing development on the edge of town that was supposed to put the Caldwell name on the map for a new generation. Derek brought in investors, a dozen of them, regular Wichita people who trusted the family name enough to write checks with several zeros on them. One of them was a man named Greg Sutton, who ran a chain of auto parts stores and had been quietly putting money into local development for years without ever making a fuss about it. Sunridge Crossing broke ground with a ribbon cutting and a write-up in the business section. 18 months later, it was a half-built skeleton of framed houses sitting empty behind a chain-link fence, and the money that was supposed to finish it had simply stopped existing. I remember the week everything changed, though it took me years to understand what I was actually watching. Derek came home from a meeting at the bank in Kansas City on a Thursday, quieter than I'd ever seen him, and poured himself a drink before dinner, which he never did on a weekday. I asked if everything was all right. He said the bank was being difficult about the construction draw schedule and that it was nothing, and then he changed the subject so fast it left a bruise on the conversation. After that week, he stopped letting me anywhere near even the household finances that touched the business, started keeping certain statements in a drawer in his home office that I'd learned, without ever being told outright, not to open. And in that same stretch of weeks, the first whispers about me started traveling through his mother's circle. I filed it away at the time as a man under pressure from a hard project. I hadn't connected it to anything because I wasn't looking for a lie. You don't audit the people you love. But the timing, looking back, was not a coincidence. It was the moment something got decided, and I just didn't know it yet. By the time Sunridge Crossing collapsed publicly, the story about why had already been written, and I wasn't the author of it. Derek told his mother, quietly at first, that the project failed because the household finances had been a mess for years, that I'd never let him build up enough of a cushion, that my spending and my insistence on separate accounts had left him without the flexibility he needed when the bank got tight. None of it was true. We'd had separate accounts because I'd insisted on financial independence after watching my own mother get left with nothing twice over by men who controlled every dollar in the house. But Diane didn't need it to be true. She needed a reason her son's company hadn't failed because of him, and I was standing right there, conveniently shaped like one. Diane ran the Wichita Founders Circle, a charity board with deep pockets and deeper memories, the way other people run a campaign. She'd buried her husband young and built the Caldwell name into something with her own 2 hands as much as his, and somewhere in those years she'd decided her son was proof she hadn't failed either of them. If Derek wasn't blameless, then what had all that work been for? So when he whispered that the trouble was probably my spending, Diane didn't question it for a second. She picked it up and she ran. It started small. A sympathetic sigh at a board luncheon. A lowered voice at church. Poor Derek, he tried so hard to make that marriage work financially. Then it grew teeth. At a Founders Circle dinner that fall, she introduced me to a new board member with a look of practiced pity. "This is Elena," she said. "She used to be married to my son. She's an accountant, if you can believe it." Such a shame what happened with the money. The woman gave me a small, knowing nod, and I understood that whatever story had been told about me had already arrived ahead of me into every room I walked into. Renee Cole had been my best friend since we were 19 years old, roommates our sophomore year of college, and inseparable every year after. She was the one I called when my mother had her first stroke. She stood up at my wedding in a green dress and cried through every vow. So when the whispers about money started wearing me down, Renee was who I leaned on. She'd come over with wine and let me talk in circles, and she always seemed to know exactly the right thing to say. Looking back, every comfort she offered had a hook buried in it. "You're so good with money, Elena." Maybe Derek just felt threatened by that. "He still cares about you. Don't let his mother get in your head. You don't need this marriage to prove you're capable." Kind words, every one of them, and every one of them landing on the exact same bruise. I didn't notice then how often her eyes drifted toward Derek across a room, or how she somehow always knew details about his schedule I hadn't told her myself. I was too grateful to have one person who didn't seem to be judging me to ask why. Derek filed for divorce on a Monday. I came home from a long week with a client audit to find a manila envelope on the kitchen counter and his side of the closet half cleared out. By the following month, he'd moved into an apartment 3 blocks from a boutique storefront that had just opened downtown, a little shop called Magnolia and Thread, owned and run, according to the grand opening write-up in the paper, by a talented local entrepreneur named Renee Cole. The story going around town by then was tidy and convenient. Elena drained the family's flexibility right when the company needed it most. Elena was always more comfortable with numbers than with people. A man builds something his whole life, and a wife like that lets it fall apart around him. Diane made sure every fundraiser, every church potluck, every chamber of commerce mixer heard some version of it. Renee, my Renee, said nothing to correct any of it. The two people who'd known me longest let me become a cautionary tale, and I didn't fight it because fighting felt like proving them right. I didn't post a word online. I went to work the next morning and finished an audit for a client who actually needed help, and that felt like the only honest thing I did that whole week. If you've ever swallowed a lie about yourself just to keep some fragile peace intact, a marriage, a friendship, a reputation you spent a decade building stone by stone, then you already know what that tastes like. It tastes like a number you know is wrong sitting at the bottom of a column you're not allowed to correct. Stay with me here, because this is where I started to understand something important. The peace I was so carefully protecting wasn't even mine to protect. It belonged entirely to the people lying about me. They needed me quiet far more than I needed to be. The story stopped being only about my marriage the day it walked into my office. I'd been next in line for 2 years to become Director of Special Investigations at Midstate Trust and Insurance, the role I'd built my entire career toward, the unit I'd basically designed the protocols for. The promotion was as good as mine, and everyone in the department knew it. Then the whispers found the partners' table. Not the truth, because there was no truth to find. Just the shape of it. Concerns about her judgment given everything with the Caldwell situation. Questions about whether she can be objective about financial misconduct given her own history. One senior partner, a man who golfed with someone on the Founders Circle board, started asking pointed questions about my fitness to lead an entire investigations division. As though I hadn't spent 9 years finding exactly the kind of dishonesty he was now worried I might be too close to. When the position was announced, it went to a man with half my caseload and none of the protocols I'd written myself. They told me I was an extremely strong candidate. They told me it had been an incredibly difficult decision. They did not tell me the real reason, but I'd grown up watching my mother lose work to men's reputations more than once. I knew the sound of a verdict dressed up as a compliment. That was the night something in me finally shifted. A lie about my marriage had already cost me my reputation around town, and I'd let it, because I told myself enduring it quietly was the responsible thing to do. But now the same lie was reaching into the one place I had never let anyone else touch: my work, my name, the thing I had spent my whole adult life building with actual evidence. I sat in my car in the parking garage that night and realized the silence I'd been so proud of had a price tag, and somebody else had been quietly running up the bill in my name for years. A colleague who'd watched the whole promotion fall apart gave me the name of an attorney named Lillian Vance, whose office sat above a dry cleaner on Douglas Avenue with a hand-painted sign and reading glasses pushed permanently up into gray hair. I told her everything. The marriage, the founder's circle gossip, the promotion, the years of being the explanation for someone else's collapse. She listened without interrupting once, which lawyers rarely do, and when I finished, she set down her pen. "What you're describing might be defamation," she said, "but I won't sell you anything easy. To win, we'd need to prove 3 things. That specific false statements were made, that they were spread to other people, and that they caused you real, measurable harm. The harm is the easy part," she said. "A lost promotion is a number. A salary difference is a number. That's the part one can build a case around blindfolded." I sat there turning the cap of my grandfather's old silver pen over in my fingers, the one I'd carried in my bag every working day since he died, and asked the question I already knew the answer to. "And the false part?" Lillian looked at me over her glasses. "That's the part you have to be willing to fight about in public," she said. "They'll say the statement is essentially true. They'll say the company failed because of financial mismanagement on your end. To win, you'd have to be ready to prove the failure wasn't yours." My stomach dropped, because the honest truth was, I didn't actually know what had caused Sunridge Crossing to collapse. I'd never seen the company's books. I'd offered once and been told to mind my own business. I almost walked out of that office. The whole idea felt like inviting an entire town to dissect a marriage I'd already buried. Then Lillian said the thing I needed to hear. "Silence isn't a virtue, Elena, when it's the thing costing you your career. Sometimes the kindest thing you can do for yourself is make somebody prove what they're saying instead of just letting them say it." I didn't answer right away. But I didn't leave either. I spent 3 weeks weighing it the way I weigh every decision, slowly, then all at once, the way a column finally balances after you've checked it for the 5th time. I wrote out everything I stood to lose. My standing in a town that had already half decided I was the cautionary tale. The Founders Circle crowd I'd see at every event for the rest of my life. The way people would say I was bitter, that I was the kind of woman who sues her ex-husband's family for spite. I knew exactly how that story would get told, because they'd already written most of it without me. Then I wrote the other column. My name, my work. The plain fact that I had done nothing wrong and was being professionally punished for it regardless. I kept coming back to one thing. I wasn't doing this to hurt Derek. If hurting him was the goal, I'd had 2 years of easier chances. I was doing this so a partner's table would stop believing a story that wasn't true, so the next time my name came up in a room I wasn't in, it came up clean. I called Lillian on a Monday morning before work and told her I was in. "Good," she said. "Then let's make them say it under oath." I hung up and walked into a meeting and had the steadiest day I'd had in 2 years. A made-up mind, it turns out, is its own kind of calm. Lillian filed the complaint a month later. It named the specific statements, the dates, the witnesses who'd heard them at the Founders Circle dinners and the chamber mixers, the lost promotion, the documented salary difference, the harm to a professional reputation built entirely on financial integrity. Reading the final draft was strange, watching my own quiet humiliation get organized into numbered paragraphs with a weight to it I hadn't expected. When it was filed, the news moved through Wichita faster than any audit I'd ever closed. Elena Whitfield is suing the Caldwells. Diane was furious in a way that, looking back, told me everything. She told the Founders Circle board that I'd become bitter and vindictive, that I clearly couldn't move on. She doubled down on every word she'd ever said, which, though she had no idea, was exactly what Lillian had been hoping for. Derek stayed quiet at first. Renee did too. But I started getting messages, some cruel, a few quietly supportive from women in town who'd had their own reputations rewritten by people who claimed to love them. One simply read, "Good for you. They did it to my sister too." I didn't respond to any of them. I just kept showing up to work and let the case move at the speed the law moves, which is to say, slowly. Lillian told me the next step was watching how Derek's lawyer chose to fight it. There were two roads, she said. They could argue the statements were just opinion, hurt feelings, nothing legally actionable. That road was annoying for them, but survivable. Or, she said, tapping her pen on the desk, they could plant their flag and argue the statements were essentially true, that the financial mismanagement really was mine. That road, she said, smiling like a woman who already knew the answer, is the one I'm hoping they take. I asked her why. Because then they have to prove it, she said. And to prove it, they have to open a door. They took the second road. Of course they did. Derek's attorney filed a response that planted the flag exactly where Lillian had hoped, arguing in plain language that the statements weren't defamatory because they were substantially true, that the financial instability that sank Sunridge Crossing traced directly back to household financial decisions I had made. When Lillian called to tell me, I could hear something close to delight underneath her steady voice. They just said the magic words, she told me. Now here's what they didn't think through. To prove that household financial mismanagement caused a multi-million-dollar commercial project to collapse, they'd have to open the company's actual financial records to the court, the ones Derek had kept locked in a drawer for 9 years. I won't oversell it, she said. Business records are guarded carefully, and no judge hands them over without a real fight first. We'd still have to convince the court it's relevant and narrow enough. But they just swore under oath that the cause was definitely you. They can't make that claim and then refuse to let anyone look at the company's own books. That's the crack. It's not a door swinging open. It's a crack. I can work with a crack. I sat down slowly at my kitchen table. Meaning, I said. Meaning, Lillian said. Derek just put his own company's finances in play. He spent 2 years hiding behind the idea that it was your spending. By swearing to that in court, he may have just handed us the reason to finally look at his books. No promises, but it's the best opening we've had. For 2 years, I'd been the explanation for a financial collapse I'd never even been allowed to look at the paperwork for. And in trying to make that official, in trying to win by saying it loud in a courtroom, Derek had done the one thing he'd refused me for 9 straight years of marriage. He'd opened the door to his own books being looked at. I thought about that night he came home from Kansas City, quiet and changed, and the drawer in his office I'd learned never to open. I didn't say anything to Lillian about it yet, but a thread I'd buried a long time ago had just twitched, and I felt it move. That night I couldn't sleep, so I did what I always do when something won't sit right. I went back through the timeline in my head, slow and careful, the way I read an old file for the line everyone else missed the first time. And there it was. The week of that bank meeting in Kansas City was the exact same week the company's books quietly stopped being something I was allowed near. It was the same stretch of weeks the first whispers about my spending began. I'd filed it away at the time as a man under stress about a hard project. I hadn't connected it to anything because I hadn't been looking for a lie. You don't audit the people you love. But now, with Lillian's words still in my ears, that trip to Kansas City looked less like a difficult bank meeting and more like the moment something got decided. I didn't have proof. I want to be clear about that. I had a memory and a professional instinct, which on its own is nothing in a courtroom. But it was enough to tell Lillian exactly where to point. And the next morning, that's exactly what I did. Lillian listened to my account of that week without writing anything down, which I'd learned by then meant she was paying very close attention. When I finished, she was quiet for a moment. On its own, that's nothing, she said. A bad week and a locked drawer. But it's a reason to ask the right question. She explained what came next. Because Derek's defense had put the company's financial health directly at issue, and because they'd sworn the cause was my household decisions and not his business decisions, Lillian could ask the court to compel limited production of the Sunridge Crossing financial records. If they want to claim it was you, she said, the law lets us ask whether it was actually him. That's how this works. You can't open the door halfway. She filed the motion the following week. Derek's attorney fought it hard, and I understood then that I'd touched something real, because nobody fights that hard over nothing. They argued business confidentiality. They argued relevance. They argued anything that might keep that drawer shut. A hearing got scheduled, and I had to sit with the not knowing, which for someone like me is its own particular kind of torture. I'm used to running a number and getting an answer. This was different. This was asking a judge for permission to even look. Before the judge ruled on the motion, Lillian needed me to sign a verified complaint, a sworn account of everything, every statement, every date, every witness, attested under penalty of perjury. She set the thick stack on the desk between us with small colored tabs marking every place my name went. Read every word of it, she said, then sign only what you know is true. So I read it. The Founders Circle dinner. The chamber mixer. The exact words Diane had used about my spending, about my judgment, about the company's collapse. The promotion that went to someone else. The salary difference laid out in a number I'd calculated myself, because of course I had. Reading my own quiet humiliation organized into numbered paragraphs did something to me. It made the lie look exactly as flimsy as it actually was. I picked up the pen Lillian handed me, then set it down and reached into my bag instead for my grandfather's silver pen, the one that had never once told a lie on a page in 50 years of use. I signed with it. My signature went down clean and certain, the steadiest thing I'd signed in 2 years. When I lifted the pen, it was done. The complaint was verified. The motion was live. Whatever was sitting in that drawer in Derek's office, the machine to find it was finally running, and I was the one who'd started it. The ruling came on an ordinary Tuesday afternoon. Lillian called while I was between meetings, and I stepped into an empty conference room to take it, my heart doing the thing it never did during an audit. The judge granted it, she said, with limits, but she granted it. She walked me through it carefully. Because the defense had affirmatively claimed the household finances caused the collapse, the court found that the relevant Sunridge Crossing financial records had become, in the judge's words, presumptively discoverable, not automatically public. Not a free-for-all. The records would be produced under a protective order, reviewed first by the attorneys and the court, used only as the case required. It's not a guarantee of anything, Lillian said, ever careful. We don't know what's in there. Maybe there's nothing. But they can't keep the drawer shut anymore. I stood in that empty conference room and let out a breath I felt like I'd been holding for 2 years. Across town, I later learned, the news landed very differently. Derek's attorney reportedly asked for a private meeting that same afternoon. Diane called Lillian's office twice and was told politely that the attorney couldn't discuss the matter with her. And for the first time, The people who had spent 2 years deciding what was true about my judgment went a little pale at the thought of a court deciding what was true about Derek's. The first sign that something was genuinely wrong on their end didn't come from Derek or Diane. It came from Renee. She texted me out of nowhere after nearly 2 years of total silence. Please don't keep pushing on this. Think about the store. I read it 3 times. We hadn't spoken since the divorce. She'd taken my marriage and my friendship and never once reached out, and now suddenly she was begging me to stop a lawsuit that, on its face, had nothing to do with her at all. That was the part that snagged. The case was between me and Derek and Diane. It was about statements made about my judgment, about a promotion I'd lost. Why would Renee, who by every appearance had won everything, be frightened of it? People who beg you to stop digging usually already know what's underneath the ground. I'd learned that the hard way over the past 2 years. I didn't answer her. I just sat with the question, turning it over, feeling the shape of something I couldn't see yet, but knew was there. Here's what I'd figured out by then, and what I want you to hear if you've ever been the calm one in a storm. The people most afraid of the truth are rarely the ones it's supposed to land on. I wasn't angry at Renee in that moment. I was curious. Bone deep, wide-awake curious. A frightened person had just told me, without meaning to, that there was a lot more underground than I'd known. The records arrived 11 days later, and I want to be precise about how, because it matters. I did not see them first. I couldn't have, and I wouldn't have wanted to. There are documents I have no professional right to touch without proper authorization, even in my own case. That's the rule, and it's a good one. The records went to Lillian through the proper channel under the protective order the judge had set, reviewed with opposing counsel present, exactly the way it's supposed to work. Then she called and asked me to come in, which she'd never done before over the phone. I knew before I sat down. She had the careful face people get right before they hand you something heavy. 3 years ago, she said, a separate holding company was opened under the Caldwell name. Brightline Holdings, LLC. She slid a single page across the desk, the rest of the file blacked out under the protective order, just the line that mattered. Brightline had received 9 separate transfers from the Sunridge Crossing escrow account over 14 months, totaling just over $300,000. The same $300,000 investors like Greg Sutton believed had gone into framing lumber and concrete footings. 3 years ago. The same season Derek came back changed from that meeting in Kansas City and quietly shut the drawer for good. The same stretch of weeks the first whispers about my spending began. I sat very still. Lillian watched me the way you watch a client right after you've shown them a number that changes everything. I forapsed, while the man who let an entire town believe that had known the whole time exactly where the money had actually gone. Didn't cry and I didn't shout. I just felt something enormous and quiet rearrange itself inside me, like a ledger finally balancing after years of being forced to look wrong. I drove home with that single page folded into my bag and didn't turn the radio on. I'd expected to feel triumphant, and I'd even braced myself against it because I didn't want to become someone who celebrates another person's ruin. Triumph never came. What came instead was something stranger and sadder. Grief, almost. 2 years of my life spent absorbing a wound that was never mine to carry. Every pitying glance at a fundraiser. Every quiet apology I'd practiced in my head for a failure that wasn't my own. Every late night wondering what I could have managed differently, what I should have caught, what I'd failed to give a marriage that, it turns out, had been quietly emptied out by someone else entirely. I sat in my driveway the way I always seemed to end up sitting in cars at the turning points of my life and said something out loud to nobody. The same 4 words I'd said to Diane at that gala. Show me the numbers. Only now I understood what I'd really been asking all along. I'd asked it of a woman so certain I was the failure, and the real answer had been sitting in a sealed bank record an hour's drive away the entire time. I wasn't the reason Sunridge Crossing failed. I never had been. The relief of that didn't arrive like fireworks. It arrived like a long exhale, like the first full breath after 2 years of shallow ones. And underneath it, a new question was already rising, one I couldn't push back down. If Brightline Holdings had been quietly funded with diverted escrow money for over a year, where exactly had that $300,000 gone? The bank records had a destination listed for the largest transfers. A storefront build-out loan paid off in full 18 months ago for a business called Magnolia and Thread. I want to be careful here about what I did and didn't do, because it matters to me that I handled this the right way. I did not go digging into Renee's personal finances. I had no right to, and I wouldn't have anyway. What I had was a contradiction, sitting in plain sight, created entirely by Derek's own sworn defense. He'd claimed under oath that my decisions caused the collapse. The escrow records said otherwise. And a thriving downtown boutique that everyone in Wichita admired as a story of one woman's hard work had apparently been built, at least in significant part, with someone else's investors' money. I called Lillian. I think there's more underneath this than just the marriage, I told her. She didn't pause. Then let's let the discovery process find it, not us, she said. The man who walked through the ballroom doors at that gala, the one I told you about at the very beginning, had a name. Thomas Brandt. I didn't know him at the time. I learned about him the way I learned everything in this story, slowly and properly, through channels that don't lie. It turned out Greg Sutton, the auto parts dealer who'd put nearly all his retirement savings into Sunridge Crossing, had quietly hired Thomas, a forensic investigator out of Kansas City, almost a year earlier. After watching the project sit half-finished behind a fence for too many seasons without an honest explanation. Thomas had spent months tracing a trail of transfers that kept dead-ending into shell accounts, until one of them finally led him, 2 weeks before that gala, to Brightline Holdings. And from Brightline to a storefront build-out loan that had been paid off years ahead of schedule by a company with no obvious source of that kind of money. He came to that gala because Diane Caldwell was listed as a minor investor in Sunridge Crossing herself, and he wanted to watch how the family behaved in public before he served anyone anything. He just happened to walk through those doors 10 minutes after she decided, in front of half the Founders Circle board, that the right move was to humiliate me one more time for an audience. I didn't engineer that moment. I didn't even fully understand it when it happened. I just looked at Diane and asked her to show me the numbers, and a stranger walked through a door behind her carrying a folder with a name in it that none of us, in that moment, knew was about to unravel everything. Thomas, it would turn out, had questions a court could finally answer, and in a town where everyone had been so certain they knew the truth about my judgment, the truth about everyone else's was about to get its day too. Derek knew. That's the part one keep coming back to, the part that turns this from sad into something closer to unforgivable. He knew exactly where that escrow money had gone, every single transfer of it, while he let his own mother stand in front of a room and tell people I was the reason a project failed. He let an entire town believe the woman who built her whole career on finding exactly this kind of dishonesty had somehow been too careless to manage her own household. Think about the nerve required for that. The cruelty isn't only the affair or the lie about my spending, though those are bad enough on their own. It's that he watched Greg Sutton lose his retirement savings and let me absorb the blame for it in every room in Wichita while he quietly funded his girlfriend's storefront with other people's money. I tried, honestly, to find some sympathy for him in all of it. I'm not a hard person by nature, but every time I reached for it, I hit the same wall. He'd had 2 years of quiet chances to tell the truth and simply let me go with my reputation intact. Instead, he built an entire public story on top of a lie and let other people's money pay for the foundation of it. When Lillian told me Derek's attorney had gone quiet, no more motions, no more fight, just a request to discuss resolving the matter, I understood exactly why. Derek wasn't afraid of losing the defamation case anymore. He was afraid of what Discovery was about to say out loud about the project he'd let an entire town believe he'd lost honestly. Diane came to see me before the hearing. She showed up at my house on a Sunday afternoon in the kind of outfit she usually saved for church, and I almost didn't open the door. When I did, she looked smaller than I remembered, older around the eyes. She didn't apologize. I want to be honest about that, because for 1 second I thought she might. She stood in my doorway and asked, in a voice with a crack running straight through it, if I would drop the suit. Not for Derek, she said. For the family. For the name. And as she spoke, I saw something I hadn't expected to see. A woman who'd been quietly lied to by her own son for years. A widow who'd poured her whole self into believing he was good, because if he wasn't, what had all that sacrifice actually built? She hadn't spread those words about me because she was cruel by nature. She'd spread them because Derek handed them to her, polished and certain, and she had loved him too much to ever question it. For one breath, standing in my own doorway, I felt for her. She'd been used too. But then she said the line one more time, except this time it came out as a plea instead of a verdict. My son should have left you years ago, Elena. Why drag the whole town through this? And I understood that even now, standing on the edge of the truth, she would rather protect the story than let go of it. Sympathy is not the same thing as surrender. I could see her pain clearly and still refused to carry her son's shame one more day. Diane, I said quietly, go home. The numbers were never mine to begin with. She left without another word, and I closed the door and didn't feel cruel. I felt finished. Derek's attorney offered a settlement a week later, a quiet one. A payment, a private retraction letter sent only to the partners at Midstate. My professional record cleared without a public word about why. Lillian laid the offer on her desk and watched me carefully. It's a strong deal on paper, she said. You'd get your reputation back at work. You could walk away with essentially everything you came for. She wasn't wrong. By the numbers, it was a win. My name restored. The promotion conversation reopened. All I had to do was let the truth get whispered into one quiet room and then sealed in a drawer forever, while Diane kept her version alive at every fundraiser in town and Derek kept his name on a half-built development everyone assumed had failed because of me. I thought about it for a long time. Then I told Lillian no. Not out of spite, I want to be clear, because the difference matters to me. I didn't refuse because I wanted to watch Derek burn. I refused because a quiet, private truth is just a softer version of the same lie. For 2 years they'd said it about me out loud, at dinners and mixers where anyone could hear it. The correction had to live in the same kind of room. Not a sealed letter nobody else would ever read. I'm not going to whisper a correction for a wound he handed me in public, I told Lillian. I'll say it once, where it counts, and then I'm done carrying it. She kept her pen and smiled. Then we go to the hearing, she said. Where something you can think clearly in. The hearing was held at the Sedgwick County Courthouse on a cold, bright morning. I'd expected to be nervous. I'd presented findings to hostile partners 100 times without my hands shaking. But this felt different, because this time the file under review was my own life. The room filled the way these things do in a town that size. A partner from Midstate, there to see exactly what they'd been wrong about. Several women from the founder's circle, the same ones who'd nodded along to Diane's version of me for 2 years. Diane herself, rigid in the second row. Derek beside his attorney, pale in a suit that no longer seemed to fit him quite right. And near the back, Renee, holding herself very still, with Thomas Brandt sitting 2 rows behind her, his presence something she could feel without needing to turn around. Lillian never raised her voice once. That's what I remember most clearly. She built it the way you build a finding, one line at a time, calm and unhurried, until the conclusion was the only one left standing. She established the statements, the dates, the witnesses, Diane's own words repeated at dinner after dinner, that my judgment, my spending, my decisions had caused the company to collapse. She established the harm, the lost promotion, the salary difference, the documented damage to a career built entirely on financial integrity. Then she addressed the defense's own sworn claim that the financial failure traced back to me, and asked the court to consider the records the defense had forced into the case by making that very argument. Under the protective order, only the relevant figures were read aloud. Over a 14-month period, 9 transfers totaling $311,000 moved from the Sunridge Crossing escrow account into a holding company called Brightline Holdings LLC, registered solely to Derek Caldwell. The room changed temperature. I watched 2 of the founders' circle women turn slowly to look at Diane, who had gone the color of paper. Then Lillian, gentle as anything, laid the contradiction on the table, the one Derek had built with his own 2 hands. The defense had sworn under oath that the failure was caused by household financial decisions. The escrow records said otherwise. And the largest single transfer from Brightline, $190,000, had gone directly toward paying off the build-out loan for a downtown storefront. She said it plainly, without drama, the way you'd read a final figure off a balance sheet. That was when Derek stood up. "You can't," his voice cracked across the courtroom. The judge told him to sit down. Diane was on her feet too now, saying my name like an accusation, saying it couldn't be true, saying I had twisted everything to ruin her son. The 2 of them, loud and unraveling, while I sat perfectly still at the table and said absolutely nothing at all. Diane turned on me then, the way drowning people grab for whatever's closest. Her composure was gone entirely, and out of the wreckage came the only words she had left. "My son should have left you years ago," she said, pointing a shaking finger across the room. He should have. She couldn't even finish the sentence the second time. I stood up slowly, because I had waited 2 years for this exact moment, and I wasn't going to rush it. I didn't shout. I kept my voice flat and even, the voice I use when I have to tell a client something true and difficult. The kind of voice that's calmer than the room can comfortably stand. "You're right, Diane," I said. The whole courtroom went quiet. "You're exactly right. Someone in this marriage should have left years ago." I looked at Derek, then back at his mother. "I just want you to look at the dates on that page before you decide who." The account only ever had his name on it. Somewhere in the back of my mind, a number I'd carried for 2 years finally settled into place, the same way a column does after the 5th time through, when it stops fighting you and just agrees with the truth. Diane's hand dropped to her side. Derek had his face in his hands, and the Founders Circle women sat there watching the truth finally rearrange everything they thought they'd known. I wasn't reckless. I'd never been reckless. The man who'd let an entire town believe otherwise was sitting 6 feet away, falling apart, while the calm woman he'd called the problem stood steady on her own 2 feet. I'd said it once out loud, where it counted, and I was already finally setting it down. What followed wasn't dramatic in the way you might picture it. No shouting match, nobody dragged out by security. It was quieter than that, and somehow worse for the Caldwells because of it. Derek didn't deny the records again. He couldn't. He sat with his head down while his own attorney requested a recess, and when the judge granted it, he didn't get up right away. He just stayed there, hunched in a suit that didn't fit, watching 2 years of careful storytelling come apart in a single morning. The Founders Circle women gathered their coats and filed out with their eyes down, and I knew by that evening the real version of events would be moving through Wichita just as fast as the old one ever had. Diane followed them out, smaller than I'd ever seen her, no longer the general of anything. And Renee slipped out during the recess, but not before Thomas Brant rose from his seat 2 rows back and walked out through the same door close behind her. The question of where Magnolia and Threads funding had really come from now headed somewhere it could finally be answered honestly, in front of investors who'd actually lost something real. The measurable things came in the weeks after, the way they tend to. Derek standing in town, the thing he'd protected at my expense for 2 years, simply evaporated. You can't outrun a county courthouse in a place that small. Greg Sutton and the other Sunridge Crossing investors filed civil claims of their own within the month, and the last I heard, Derek had moved 2 states away, somewhere nobody knew the story yet. He'd spent 2 years making sure everyone believed a lie about me. In the end, the truth didn't need me to chase him down. It just needed to be said once, in the right room, by someone willing to stand still while she said it. Midstate didn't make a show of it, which honestly was fine by me. A few weeks after the hearing, the managing partner asked to see me. He'd been the one who sat in that courtroom, and he had the uncomfortable look of a man who'd believed the wrong thing and knew it. He told me the director of special investigations position was open again. He told me the firm had reviewed the earlier concerns about my judgment and found them entirely without basis. He didn't quite apologize, but he came close, and from a managing partner, close is about all you ever actually get. I took the role, not because I needed to win one more thing, but because it had always been mine, built with my own 2 hands over 9 years, and I wasn't going to let somebody else's keep it from me a single day longer. My first week running the division, I sat down with a new case file and felt something I hadn't felt in 2 years, which was simply the quiet satisfaction of work that was entirely, undeniably mine. People always want to know what happened to everyone after. So let me tell you, and then I'll let you go. Derek left, like I said, somewhere out west, starting over in a place that hadn't heard the story yet. I don't wish him harm. I don't wish him much of anything anymore, which is its own kind of freedom. Diane lost the thing she'd built her entire identity around. Not because I ever said a single word against her at the Founders Circle, I never did, but because the truth about her son was simply too large to keep out of a town that size. I heard she stepped down from the board within the year. I felt a small, real sadness about that, the kind you feel for someone who chose the lie right up until the moment it finally cost her everything anyway. Renee and the question of Magnolia and Threads funding got sorted out through the investor's civil case, the proper way, through the courts, not through me. I hope, for whatever it's worth, that she found something honest to build on the other side of it. Renee and I never spoke again after that hearing. Some friendships don't really break. They just turn out never to have been what you thought they were, and you set them down along with everything else. As for me, I kept the job, kept the house, kept my grandfather's silver pen in my bag every single day. I didn't file anything else. I'd gotten exactly what I came for. My name was clean, and the truth was finally standing up on its own, without me having to hold it upright anymore. That was enough. There was one more thing I did, and then I was done. I wrote Diane a short note, not long, not angry. I'd thought a lot about her standing in my doorway that Sunday, a woman who'd been lied to by her own son and chose the lie anyway. And I found I didn't want to carry any anger toward her into the rest of my life. Anger is just one more figure you have to keep accounting for. So I kept it simple. I won't carry your son's lie anymore, I wrote. You shouldn't either. That was all of it. I didn't expect a reply, and I didn't get one, but writing it closed something for me regardless. I held my grandfather's pen in my hand that night and thought about what he used to say, that a ledger doesn't care who you want to be, only what you actually did. I'd waited 2 years for the actual numbers to finally be allowed to speak. They had. And the time I'd spent waiting wasn't wasted time anymore. It was just the cost of doing the math correctly the first time. If you take one thing away from my story, let it be this. The truth doesn't need you to shout, and it doesn't need you to chase anyone down. It just needs you to stop being afraid of what the numbers will say once somebody is finally willing to add them up. That's my story. 2 years of a reputation that was never actually mine, and one quiet sentence that finally brought the whole thing down. If you've ever been told you were the reckless one, the careless one, the reason something fell apart that you never actually controlled, let this be your sign to stop carrying it. Say your truth where it counts, and then set it down for good. If this one reached you, share it with somebody who needs to hear it tonight. Drop a comment, hit subscribe, and I'll see you in the next one.